Hey guys, Ralph here, and today I'm going to show you how to replace your wheel hub assembly on your Nissan Juke. Things we need: we have this new wheel bearing, some metric socket set, ratchet and extension, removable thread locker. Also have this chisel, wire brush, penetrating fluid, a brake cleaner, universal socket joint. Also have these open wrenches, this anti-seize lubricant, a hammer. Also have this 32mm socket for the wheel nut, and this torque wrench. First step is to remove lug nuts using a 21mm socket and a breaker bar. Crack the lug nuts free before raising the vehicle. Remove the wheel off, place it under the chassis for additional protection. Use a wire brush first to clean the outside of the ABS sensor. Using a 10mm socket and ratchet, remove the ABS sensor bolt. Use a plier or screwdriver to wiggle the sensor bolt out of the hub. Remove the cotter pin using a pair of needle nose pliers to bend it up straight, then pull it out. Use a flathead screwdriver and wedge it on the rotor to prevent it from spinning before we remove the axle nut. Using a 32mm socket and a breaker bar, break the axle nut loose and remove it. Since my breaker bar is too short to gain leverage, we're going to use an impact wrench to remove the axle nut from the hub. Remove the caliper bolt using 14mm socket and a breaker bar just to break it loose. We got one on the bottom and one on the top. And once we break it loose, we can just use our hands to remove the bolt out. Once we remove the two bolts, pop the caliper open and wedge it up. Once you have the caliper removed, secure it out of the way with a bungee cord or zip ties. The purpose of this is to avoid putting pressure on the brake line. Remove the two brake pads from the caliper bracket. Sometimes it's seized up, so you need to use a screwdriver to remove it. Remove these two bolts holding the caliper bracket. Use a 19mm socket and a breaker bar to break it loose, and then we can use a regular ratchet to remove the caliper bracket bolt. Sometimes the bolt is stuck, so we're going to use some penetrating fluid. That's one on top and one on the bottom. After we break it loose, we can now use a regular ratchet to remove the caliper bracket bolt. Remove your rotor. You can hammer it down if it got rust welded. Remove the four 17mm bolts on the backside of the spindle, securing the hub. Before removing the bolts, try to soak it up with penetrating fluid so it will be easier for us to remove it. Using a 17 socket, ratchet, and some extension, remove the four bolts securing the hub. So here are the four bolts that I removed from the back side of the spindle. We got two here and two on the other side of the back of the spindle right here. Remove the hub from the knuckle using a hammer. Try hitting the edges to free it up from the spindle. Clean the inside of the mounting surface using a wire brush so that it will be easier for us to get the new one in. Then try to spray some brake cleaner as well. You can also use a sandpaper to clean the inside of the mounting surface. Apply anti-seize on the mounting surface, so the next time we need to remove the wheel hub, it will be easier for us and it's not gonna seize up. Try to put some anti-seize on the spindle as well. Reinstall the dust shield and the hub. The easiest way to do this is to get it close over the CV axle and send some few bolts in from the backside to keep it in place. Before installing these four bolts back to the hub, apply a little bit of this threadlocker to prevent vibrations from loosening these bolts. Using a 17mm socket, ratchet, and extension, tighten down the four bolts, securing your hub to the knuckle. Once you tighten those four bolts with a regular ratchet, using a torque wrench, torque those four bolts to 75 foot-pounds. Good. That's two, and two more on the other side. Once we're done torquing those four bolts, reinstall the nut back onto the CV axle. Reinstall the rotor. Use a lug nut to prevent the rotor from moving before installing the brake caliper. Clean the caliper bracket with a wire brush to remove the dust and dirt before installing it. Put some removable thread locker on the brake caliper bracket bolt to prevent vibrations from loosening the bolt as we drive. Reinstall the 19mm bolts by hand for the caliper bracket. Tighten down those two bolts with a regular ratchet and a 19mm socket. Using a torque wrench, torque the caliper bracket bolt to 100 foot-pounds. Before installing the brake pads, apply anti-seize on the ears of the brake pads to prevent the brakes from squeaking. So we're done reinstalling our brake pads. Next is grab the caliper and install the bolts. Using a torque wrench, torque down the bolts to 20 foot-pounds. All good. Torque the axle nut to 129 foot-pounds. Once torqued, we can now remove the flathead screwdriver from the rotor. Install the cage and the new cotter pin as well. Clean the rotor with a brake cleaner to remove the grease and oil. Reinstall the ABS sensor using a 10mm socket and ratchet. Reinstall the tire and lug nuts.
I'm not sure.
Oh, we see.
Yeah.
But I'm.
Remember to tighten those lug nuts in a cross star pattern when the tire is on the ground. And that's how you change and replace your wheel hub on your Nissan Juke. If you find this video helpful, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you on our next vlog. Thanks.